Спасибо. Здравствуйте. Hello. It's a pleasure to be back in the fabulous Astana for the 26th time. In a country that is beginning to feel like a second home. We're here. Well, yes, but we also get the... So it's always, in fact, we've come together here to look at how we're going to build more effective learning environments for young people and what could be more inspiring. Next. There's a very big change ahead. There is a discussion in Kazakhstan about beginning to teach mathematics and science through the medium of English in all schools. That's an idea that's in the air and is being discussed. Next. So, I'm going to be talking about learning maths and science through English and about the opportunities and challenges that are involved with that. Next. So the goal, the planned outcome, is that you will have an overview of some of the strategic implications of teaching maths and science through English. So those are management implications and pedagogical implications. Next. This is the structure of my talk. I'm first and foremost going to give you 4 key messages. Then what's happening? Oh, sorry, we agreed that I would use a signal of a hand, but obviously I'm moving my hand. So I think I'll just say next, if I may. Problems faced in 3 countries or regions, because I think it's important not just to look at what's worked well, but we also heard about some of the things that haven't worked so well, and I think it's important to look at those. And then to look at what has been successful. Next. So 4 key messages. The first one is, trilingualism through education is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. And it's been done in several places in the world, on a regional level, even on a national level, but primarily on a regional level and often in a network of schools. And I'll be talking about these points at greater length in a few minutes. But I'm going to start saying next because I move my hands around so much that obviously that wasn't a good way of suggesting how we move forward. So then, teaching maths and science through English is a very big and complex change. And this change is actually nested inside of a very complex organ, which is an educational system, and a society which is even more complex. Next. So, yes, I think it's important to be ambitious. Kazakhstan has been exceptionally ambitious, and you've accomplished an incredible amount. It's not the same country it was in 1991. But one also has to be realistic. Next. But I think it's important to explore the unexpected consequences. So it's important to plan, but also look at some of the potential risks and plan for ways of how to address those risks. Next. So, trilingual education, trilingualism through education is definitely possible, but it requires, next, qualified teachers who understand the pedagogy, speak the languages. Next. Certainly an understanding of what trilingual education is. I just read a book on trilingual education in China, and most of the chapters were not about trilingual education. They were about teaching through Han Chinese and Mandarin Chinese, Putonghua, and then learning 2 other languages through language classes. We would not call, most academics would not call that trilingual education. We refer to trilingual education as an education system where subjects such as maths or science are being taught through one language, some other subjects through another, and yet other subjects through a third language. Next. So public and government support, both at the national and local level, is particularly important. And everyone needs to have the same understanding so they can support in the same way. Next. Definitely very thorough planning that includes weighing the risks and thinking of ways of reducing the risks. Next. Step-by-step implementation. Next. Support for not just teachers, but school leaders, government officials, parents, and many other stakeholders need to learn about bilingual education, become part of it, and support the initiative. Next. And one needs universities who are partners, who understand trilingual education, can help prepare teachers, leaders, can do research, etc. Next. And sufficient time and money. Next. So now this change is complex, and is also part of a large complex system, which is the education system. And because what you're planning or possibly planning is so complex, let's for a moment look at what are the characteristics of any complex system, because you're trying to do this in this type of context. Next. So next. Any complex system is highly diverse. There are different understandings in the system, different needs, and therefore it's very difficult to influence change. Next. It's dynamic. Often there are new issues that are arising. It's not just the trilingual policy that you're trying to put through. There may be 20 policies that are competing. Next. Complex systems are resistant to change. There's lots of changes. There's always somebody who's suggesting some kind of a new change. You can't adopt them all, so people are naturally resistant. Next. They're never fully under central control. I've been a government official in Estonia. We've developed policies and we thought we've done it in an inclusive way and that we can move forward and everyone will do it. No, people shut the doors and still do what they want if they haven't been part of that change process. Next. So there are lots of different channels of communication. Do you know that white-collar workers hear 3,200,000 words related to work in the workplace in 3 months? This is Cotter from Harvard University that has added this up. Millions of words. If we're trying to compete with a new program, it's very hard to get onto that chart. And you might get 10,000 words, you might get even 100,000, but you're still competing with 3,200,000 other words. Next. So I think it's important to be ambitious but be realistic. Next. We can start off, in a sense, with pilot schools, and that is indeed something that is already challenging, but it is something indeed that we can cope with. It may be hard, it may be heavy, but it can be done. However, if one were to next move to all the schools instantly in a nation, and in Kazakhstan there are well over 7,000 schools, well, it might not be so easy, and it's certainly going to take more than 2 people or a group of people. It's going to be a very complex thing to do. Next. We need to explore unexpected consequences. Next. I'd like to introduce my friend here, this dog. And next. This is a normal situation. This is something we could expect. But if this happens next, this is abnormal. And we do have an expression in English about the tail wagging the dog. Let me give you an example. So, if the dog is the education system, then we heard from Kathleen about how one small aspect, such as assessment, next, can have an incredible effect on the system, an effect that you're probably not expecting, so that next assessment can start creating this kind of a situation. It can shake the whole system. It can have effects that you don't want it to have. Or if people are really afraid of bilingual education, next, you can have even a greater reaction. Next. So allow me to move to give you examples from 3 regions or countries where bilingual or trilingual education hasn't been as successful as the governments would have hoped. And let's talk about why. And then we'll talk about systems that have worked and how that can happen if I manage to do it in the time allotted. So let's first look at South Korea, then at Malaysia, then at Hong Kong. South Korea first, please. Next. Next. So in December 2007, President Lee Myung-pak was elected with a very large majority. This is a man who used to be the mayor of Seoul. He used to be the head, an executive in a major construction company. He had public experience and private sector experience. A very successful man. What did he do? Next. In less than 2 months, he announces nationwide English immersion programs will be instituted all across the country in all schools. What happened? Next. Well, first of all, before what happened, let's figure out why he did this. Next. Well, he wanted to increase international competitiveness. Japan, China, Malaysia, even Nepal are competitors for South Korea, and their English results in all those countries on IELTS tests are higher except for China. The president's worried that South Korea wasn't going to be able to compete because English was seen as essential to competition. Next. Also, they wanted to reduce household spending on English. 15.3 billion US dollars, the equivalent thereof, was being spent by parents on extra English classes. And the government was trying to reduce that burden on parents. Next. They wanted to promote educational equality so poorer parents and children from poorer families could get the English at school, that they didn't need the extra lessons. Next. Well, and those are all good ideas. So how did they do it? Next. A good plan. English Education Roadmap 2008. They thought about it. Although I don't know how much you can think about it in 6 weeks. Next. The plan was to start teaching maths or science and other subjects in English. Okay. Next. And they put 4.25 billion into the budget, and this is in US dollars, the equivalent. Next. So what happened? Next. Massive negative reaction. People came into the streets to protest. Next. There was fear for the Korean language and culture. Korean history came to mind. Korea had been occupied by Japan. People felt this was redolent of the time when Japanese was being forced upon people. The Korean Institute for Language was afraid that the Korean language would suffer. Next. There was teacher opposition. 60% of teachers said they didn't support the program. Next. The English immersion program was cancelled very, very quickly. The pressure was so heavy. Next. So what happened? There was a new national plan. Next. English language classes to be taught in English. Well, the interesting thing there is that just under 50% of teachers felt they could actually teach their English classes in English. So, next, there was a 6-month training program put in. Next. Some teachers were going to be sent overseas. Next. $1.8 billion, equivalent of a $1.8 billion budget. Seemed to make a lot of sense. What happened? Unexpected consequences. Next. Koreans abroad were also being invited to return to the country for a sense of patriotism. They spoke English well to help the country. So what really happened? Families spent even more money on English lessons. Why? Because there was going to be high-stakes testing in English, and parents were worried that the children would not get access to university. They spent even more money. Next. Students living in remote areas actually moved to the big cities to get English tuition, to get extra English classes. And the program was canceled. So, lots of money, high-level government support, some planning, some thought put into it. It made a lot of economic sense, didn't work. Next. Let's look at Malaysia. Next. It's an ethnically diverse country. As you can see, about 50% Malays. There are other indigenous groups. The big minority group are the Chinese, 22% of the population. And 7% are Indians, so there are schools teaching through Chinese, schools teaching through Tamil, schools teaching through Bahasa Malay. Next. In 2002, the Prime Minister announces a decision to teach maths and science through English, starting in 2003. Next. Why? Well, a desire to compete globally. A feeling that English was essential for success, economic success. Next. And this was very much inspired by Singapore and India. Very different context. Singapore has shifted to an English medium education system, and the whole country is shifting to speaking English as the primary language. Knowledge and information explosion in science and technology mostly is taking place in English, so there was a feeling that to access that knowledge, people needed to learn to speak English. Next. So, how did they do it? Well, they had a systematic and a well-planned approach, and I do mean this was very systematic and very well-planned. Next. Incredible textbooks. A lot of money went into them. Beautiful, well thought out. Pedagogically, I'm on thin territory because I haven't analyzed them myself, I've just looked at them quickly. But when I've looked at them quickly, very impressive. Next, activity books, workbooks. Next. Teacher guides. Pupil and teacher CD-ROMs with some incredible films on it, with text on it. Really engaging, exciting material. Glossaries, so we all know what one term means in one language and the other language, what the key terms are about education. Teacher training. Research. What happened? In 2009, phase out of the program begins. In 2012, the program is shut down. That was really well planned. A lot of thought went into it. It was still canceled. So, next. What went wrong? There were street protests by Malays, tear gas. The police used tear gas to break up one of these. There were rural students. People felt that they were being disadvantaged. But what did the results show? The ministry said that the average grades in science in the rural population dropped by 2.5% and in urban populations by 3%. That's not a big difference. But people saw it as a disadvantage. The feeling was that people in cities, teachers in cities can speak English, in the countryside they can't necessarily speak it well, and the students in the countryside would be disadvantaged. And also a feeling, there was opposition from Tamil and Chinese schools because they were already working on bilingualism, and they were worried about losing time for Tamil, losing time for Chinese. Yet, interestingly enough, monolinguals felt that these bilinguals were also advantaged and that they were actually doing better in English. These were feelings that people had, and feelings turn into facts for people. Next. So on average, just over half of teaching time in classes to be taught in English were actually delivered in the English language. And so only 8% of teachers were using English exclusively. So the government had a plan, but it wasn't being implemented. And many teachers lacked the language skills. Many teachers did not have the pedagogical skill to do the job. Next. So the program was canceled. And once again, despite the fact that high political support for it, money for it, great materials, lots of investment, it still didn't work. And one might ask, why would you cancel a whole program? Surely every single school wasn't failing. Next. Hong Kong. So it's a former British colony. It was returned to China in 1997. Next. Pre-1970, immersion was in English, was available only in a select small number of schools. But by the 1970s, most of the schools, and this is at 90% something of the schools, began to offer English immersion beginning in the 7th year of school. So it became ubiquitous. Almost everyone was doing it. Next. But in 1998, only 25% of secondary schools, the high performers, were allowed to offer immersion. Why? The research showed that students in science, geography, and history, and to a lesser extent in maths, that they were studying through English, student performance or achievement was declining. So what conclusion can we draw from this? Is bilingual education bad? I think not. It's not because bilingual education is a flawed concept. It was because of language use. Some teachers did not use English consistently in class. Many teachers did not insist that students speak English. Next. The pedagogy. There was a concentration on preparing for exams in Chinese, not on teaching through English. Once again, the assessment, it's the tail that's wagging the dog. There's little scaffolding for working in English. So students were working with texts that were too difficult, but teachers weren't providing the support mechanisms that were needed. Students had trouble understanding the materials, and there was simply a lack of teaching skills. This concept of content and language integrated learning was not being applied. Teachers weren't supporting both the learning of content and language at the same time. Next. Commitment was an issue. Many teachers did not believe in immersion. Worse yet, many simply did not understand immersion. So how do you make that work if people aren't committed to it? Training. Also, there was a general lack of immersion-specific teacher pre-service and in-service training. So the government had people were doing it. They were doing it because there was also a lot of public pressure. But then they cut back on the program very heavily. But so what happened? Parental pressure. You're going to take English away from us? Okay, it's bad. I'm not crazy about the fact that it's bad. I'd like my child to be in a good English language program. But bad is better than nothing, seemed to be the attitude. So there was more pressure from the parents to keep delivering through the medium of English. So what has happened? In 2008, the government eases restrictions, and all schools can offer up to 25% through the medium of English. That's all secondary schools, from grade 7 on. Next. By 2014, 90% of schools offer some form of late English language instruction. That is how strong the demand is. Now, Hong Kong, it would be great if we could spend more time speaking about it, because now Putonghua, or Mandarin Chinese, is also becoming very powerful. And so children who are growing up as Cantonese speakers, which is a language which is quite different from Mandarin, they're not mutually intelligible languages. Children are more and more being put in the situation of having to learn the three, and so is the school system. but that's another story. Next. But I would like to say that trilingual education is possible. And I'm not going to dwell on it, but we do have plenty of examples of it. Some are well researched, some are less well researched. We can say some are successful because the parents are voting with their feet and are keeping their children in these programs. Others have been very well researched, such as the Basque Country or Luxembourg, Val d'Ost as well in Italy. Next. So I would like to say it is possible. So I know I've been saying lots of negative things, but it is absolutely possible. I understand I've got 5 more minutes? Yeah? Okay. But it needs the right investments. And let's look at what some of those are. The first step to trilingualism is bilingualism. So one fosters bilingual education. One needs to work with stakeholders. You have to show people that the first language is going to be protected and that you will work to protect that first language, or people will fight your program. You need to plan through. You need to run a pilot. You need to consider several pathways. And you need to have high expectations. It's possible to accomplish a lot. NIS has very high expectations for its students. And there's lots of research from bilingual and regular systems that shows if there are high expectations, if we believe that students can do it, they will. Because we'll help them do it. And they'll help themselves. They'll believe in themselves. Next. One has to make sure rural and minority language schools get extra support. They shouldn't be disadvantaged. They need extra time and money to help them. We need to raise public awareness. We need to create a pool of qualified teachers. We need to build the capacity of universities. And we need to align assessment with the change we're planning. Next. So I'm going to just go into 2 of these points. And later on this presentation will be available. There's more detail about each of these points. But so bilinguals are often effective language learners. And we heard today about the African context where the trilingual students are being successful.
And today, in the morning, our students also was the example.
Absolutely. NIS is a perfect example. Kazakhstan is full of trilingual people I meet. You have teachers who speak these languages in this country, for instance. You have teachers who speak Kazakh and Russian. You can move forward strongly across the nation with both of those languages and get ready for trilingual later. But that's a good first step, is my message. And make it voluntary. We made it voluntary in Estonia. We had resistance from Russian-speaking parents. By the end, everybody's running towards these schools. Now we have almost no monolingual. I don't think we have a monolingual Russian school anymore in Estonia. Parents won't accept it. They want their children to have Estonian and English. Next. My last point that I'm going to get into a little bit of depth with is work with your stakeholders. Work with parents, work with those people who are going to be influenced by your program. Next. So a stakeholder is any group or individual that can be affected by or can influence the organization of the school. So anyone who can cause you trouble, anyone who can help you, anyone who can feel you're going to hurt them, anyone who thinks they could get an advantage from you. Next. So rural and urban teachers and students are clearly one of the major stakeholders, but they're not alone in this. Next. There are many other stakeholders, and I'm just showing some of these stakeholders here. Authors, politicians, researchers, university professors, examination board staff. There are many, many of these people, and they need to know about the program, understand it, and become part of supporting it. Next. Because you never know when you're going to get someone coming along trying to do this to your program. So you need to find all of those people who might cause you trouble and bring them into the fold. Have them learn about the program, because often they don't have the knowledge they need. Next. So in a sense, in English we say we want everyone to get onto the same page. Everyone to, in a sense, sing like an orchestra, or all of us to work together. It is possible, bilingual and trilingual education. We know it works in many places in the world. My wish or hope for you is that you be ambitious, that you make it happen, but that you be aware of the risks, that you plan for it, and that you approach this in a step-by-step way, piloting and testing and doing research. And you can achieve, you will be able to achieve things others have not been able to do. There aren't a lot of nations that are moving forward with such a strong trilingual policy. Kazakhstan can become a model for the world. I thank you.